There are mysteries that whisper beneath the surface of our world. Stories so bizarre, so chilling, they defy reason and laugh in the face of logic. These aren't ghost tales told around a campfire. These are real, documented, investigated, and still completely unsolved. This is not a list of oddities. This is a journey into the heart of the unknown. The Man from Taured, Tokyo, 1954. A humid summer day blurred the edges of the city, with sweat beading on the brows of customs officials at Haneda Airport. Among the many travelers disembarking from an international flight, one man stood out, not by his appearance, but by the puzzled reaction he drew from airport authorities. He was well-dressed, middle-aged, confident. His accent was neutral European. He carried a passport, visa stamps, currency from multiple countries, and an air of someone who had done this countless times before. But when the customs officer glanced at his passport, confusion twisted into alarm. The country of origin listed wasn't France, Germany, or anywhere else recognizable. It was a place called Taured. The passport, while appearing authentic, bore the insignia of a country that did not and had never existed. The customs staff double-checked. Nothing. No record of Taured anywhere on the globe. But the man seemed just as confused. He claimed Taured had been around for 1,000 years. He even pointed to its supposed location on a map, nestled between France and Spain, right where Andorra is. But when told no such country existed, his reaction wasn't shock, it was irritation. He insisted that something must be wrong. He'd traveled to Japan multiple times before using the same documents. His passport had stamps from Tokyo, among other cities. The Japanese visas appeared legitimate. The officials were baffled. To clear things up, they brought him to a secure office and asked more questions. He answered fluently in several languages: French, Japanese, Spanish. He listed the company he worked for, located, according to him, in Taured. Authorities tried calling the company. No record. They called the hotel he claimed to have reservations with. No booking. He gave them the name of his supposed contact in Japan. The company had never heard of the person. The deeper they probed, the more things dissolved into impossibility. But it didn't end there. When customs contacted European agencies, they confirmed that Taured did not exist. Yet the man carried not just a passport, but checks, official bank documents, even a driver's license, all from this non-existent nation. Every piece was physically real. It wasn't a forgery. It was something much more unnerving, authentic documentation from a place that simply wasn't. By now, the man, still calm, was treated as a potential threat, perhaps a spy. He was moved to a guarded hotel room while officials sorted the mess. 2 armed guards were posted outside. The room had no balcony, no air vents large enough to crawl through, and was several stories high. There was no way out unnoticed. But by morning, he was gone, vanished, without triggering the door alarm, without being seen by a single guard. All his belongings, including his mysterious documents, had disappeared with him, as if he and Taured had never existed. The authorities launched a frantic investigation. Surveillance was combed through. Nothing. The bed sheets were undisturbed. No one had entered or exited the room. It was as if the man had dissolved into the air. So who was he? Some believe the story proves the existence of parallel universes, alternate realities just barely out of sync with our own. The man from Taured, they say, somehow slipped through the veil. A glitch, a crack, a momentary overlap of 2 worlds. If true, it raises terrifying possibilities. How many other travelers have slipped in from places we can't find on a map? Do some never realize they've crossed over? Or worse, do some realize, but can never go back? Others think it was an elaborate hoax. But if so, it's one of the most detailed in history. And if the documents were fake, they were masterpieces, containing inks, stamps, and styles consistent with official paperwork of the time, yet completely untraceable. There's a chilling idea that the man may not have been from another world, but from another time, possibly an alternate timeline where Taured existed. But something changed. Maybe his crossing wasn't physical at all. Maybe he, and others like him, slipped through during moments of heightened emotional stress, or in places where reality is thin. Airports, border crossings, hospitals, areas where people already feel disconnected from normal life. Stranger still is that this story is not alone. In 2006, a man was detained at Munich airport for carrying a passport from a country named St. Kitts. But the island nation hadn't yet gained full independent recognition. In the 1990s, a woman in Russia presented credentials from an entirely unknown university, speaking fluent dialects that no one could identify. In each case, something didn't add up. Something felt off. The man from Taured remains the most famous of these incidents. Not because of what we know, but because of what we don't. His sudden appearance, his complete legitimacy on paper, and his impossible disappearance from a locked hotel room guarded by armed men. No explanation has ever satisfied both logic and fact. If he was from another world, where did he go? Back through the rift? Or did he vanish because he had stayed too long? And if people can slip through from other dimensions, could we? Could you walk into an elevator one day and find yourself in a version of your city where the flags are different, the streets slightly wrong, your friends don't remember you, and you don't belong? If the man from Taured was real, then nothing about our world can be assumed to be stable. Reality, as we understand it, is only one version, one thread among many. And sometimes, whether by accident or by design, those threads twist together just long enough for someone to step across. Then, just as suddenly, they vanish. The vanished village of Anjikuni. It was the winter of 1930 when Joe LaBelle, a seasoned fur trapper familiar with the harsh terrain of northern Canada, made his way to the remote Inuit village of Anjikuni. Tucked beside the still waters of Anjikuni Lake, the village had always been a welcome stop, home to friendly faces, warm fires, and the kind of small comforts that matter in the wilderness. But this visit would be different, deeply, disturbingly different. As LaBelle approached, he was struck by a heavy, unnatural silence. The air felt wrong. The village should have been bustling with movement, children playing, sled dogs barking, the hum of cooking fires and quiet laughter drifting through the snow. But there was nothing, not a sound, not a soul in sight. His unease grew with every step. The homes, small, snow-dusted huts made of stone and caribou hides, stood intact. Doors hung open, blankets flapped in the icy wind. Campfires smoldered with dying embers, as if they'd only recently been abandoned. Meals were laid out, half-eaten, and tools sat mid-use. A pot of stew, scorched to the bottom, hinted that it had been left unattended for hours. And yet, no people, no signs of where they had gone, no footprints leading away. Even the sled dogs, essential for travel and survival, were gone. LaBelle searched every corner, calling out. Nothing answered him. It was as though the villagers had stepped out for a moment and never came back. Rattled, he traveled to the nearest telegraph station and contacted the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. The Mounties dispatched a team, who made the long journey to Anjikuni. What they found only deepened the mystery. The village was deserted, not ransacked, not abandoned in haste. Everything had been left in place, as though time had simply stopped. Rifles leaned against door frames. Furs used for warmth and trade remained. Nothing valuable had been taken. This wasn't a fleeing group. It was an erased one. Then came something even stranger, the graveyard. Several graves were found disturbed, dug up, empty. But there were no shovel marks, no signs of an animal intrusion, just precise, clean openings in the frozen earth. The bodies, gone. The final horror was the discovery of the sled dogs. They hadn't fled or been stolen. They were dead, still tied to their posts, starved and frozen solid in the snow. That fact alone told investigators that something had happened days ago, long enough for strong, resilient dogs to waste away. And yet, in all that time, not a single person had come for them, not even to release them. Rumors spread quickly, as they always do when logic fails. Some Inuit locals spoke of the sky people, spirits or beings that could come down from above and carry people away. They mentioned lights in the sky, glowing orbs that moved without sound and blinked out in a flash. Others said the villagers had angered a spirit of the land, perhaps disturbed something sacred. Some claimed to have heard cries and whispers on the wind near the lake in the nights before the disappearance. Skeptics, of course, tried to explain it all away. A mass migration, perhaps, or a case of starvation driving the group into the wilderness. But the facts didn't support that. If they had fled, why leave behind weapons, supplies, and food? Why leave the dogs? Why make no effort to survive? Even today, some argue the story is an exaggeration or myth, twisted by time and poor reporting. But elements of it appear in RCMP files, and LaBelle, by all accounts a trustworthy man, never changed his story. He never sought fame. In fact, after telling it once, he refused to speak of it again. The Anjikuni mystery has never been solved. No bodies were ever found. No trail uncovered. It's as if the people were plucked from the earth by invisible hands. That one chilling possibility, mass disappearance with no cause, has kept this story alive for nearly a century. And it's not just about what happened, it's where it happened. The Canadian North is vast and unknowable. Even now, much of it remains untouched, unseen by human eyes. There are stretches of wilderness where a plane could crash and never be found, where an entire community, in the dead of winter, could vanish without leaving behind so much as a scream. Occasionally, whispers still surface. A pilot who saw odd lights moving just above the tray line. A hunter who found a campsite deep in the woods, new looking, but utterly deserted. A story from another village, where people once felt the ground hum beneath them, before the sky lit up green. Are these connected to Anjikuni? Who can say? The deeper you look into this story, the more it resists answers. Like the snow covering a trail, time has buried the truth. Maybe the villagers stepped into another realm. Maybe something ancient and unseen came for them. Or maybe, in one of the most isolated corners of the world, a mystery was born simply because no one was there to see what really happened. But those who live in the north still remember. They speak quietly of that place by the lake, where no one goes anymore. The ground feels different there, they say. The air is too still, too silent, as if it's waiting for someone else to vanish. The Toxic Lady of Riverside Hospital. February 19, 1994. Riverside General Hospital, California. It started as a routine emergency. At 8:15 p.m., paramedics wheeled in a 31-year-old woman named Gloria Ramirez. She was suffering from advanced cervical cancer, and that night her heart was racing, her blood pressure plummeting. She was confused, gasping, her body slick with sweat and an odd oily sheen. But none of that would become the mystery. The moment her blood was drawn, everything spiraled into chaos. Nurse Susan Kane, the first to draw Ramirez's blood, noticed something strange, a strong ammonia-like smell rising from the sample tube. Then she saw what looked like manila-colored particles floating in the fluid. That's when she staggered back. Moments later, she collapsed. A second nurse entered the room and began feeling lightheaded too. Then a medical resident fainted. One by one, 6 hospital workers lost consciousness, while others were struck with nausea, dizziness, even temporary paralysis. The ER was evacuated. Gloria Ramirez died minutes later. What followed would be one of the strangest medical mysteries in modern history. Doctors, nurses, and experts from all over the country tried to explain what had happened that night. But what they found didn't just confuse the scientific community, it disturbed them. In all, 23 people were affected. 5 were hospitalized. 1 staff member remained in intensive care for over 2 weeks. Yet none of them had physically touched Ramirez's blood, except through gloves and standard medical procedures. And all claimed that the toxic exposure came the moment the blood was drawn. The incident was dubbed the Toxic Lady. The California Department of Health launched a full investigation. Their official conclusion? A bizarre case of mass hysteria. They argued that the symptoms stemmed from stress, fear, and the power of suggestion. But that answer didn't sit right with the staff involved. Fainting is one thing, but convulsions, paralysis, and chemical burns? That doesn't add up. Digging deeper, a private research team uncovered a potential theory. They proposed that Gloria, in a desperate attempt to treat her cancer at home, had applied dimethyl sulfoxide, DMSO, to her skin. It was a known solvent with pain-relieving properties, available in hardware stores as a degreaser. When applied to the skin, it produces a garlic-like or ammonia odor. And under certain conditions, like being inside a warm hospital and administered with high-flow oxygen, it could chemically transform into dimethyl sulfate, a highly toxic compound that can cause convulsions and unconsciousness when inhaled. On the surface, it sounded plausible, but again, there were problems. DMSO doesn't normally convert into dimethyl sulfate in the human body, especially not in quantities strong enough to knock out trained professionals in a ventilated ER. And none of the follow-up tests on the staff showed residues of such toxins. What's more, the room had no measurable traces of gas. And why would these effects begin instantly upon drawing blood and not before? More questions emerged. Why was Gloria's blood filled with strange crystals? Why did it smell of ammonia? Why was her body so unusually warm for someone near death? And how could a known legal compound react with such deadly force? Yet only in that precise moment, then there was another eerie detail. According to the paramedics who brought her in, Gloria's last words were slurred and nonsensical, but one of them swore he heard her whisper, "Take care of my children." Gloria didn't have any children. Her autopsy was conducted under unusual circumstances. Her body was sealed in an airtight casket, and the coroner's team wore full hazmat gear. Yet even months later, no definitive cause of toxic release was identified. Her death was officially attributed to kidney failure from cancer, but the symptoms the staff endured? Never explained. To this day, the medical field has no firm conclusion. Some cling to the DMSO theory. Others say it was something far stranger. Was Gloria Ramirez the accidental catalyst of a chemical nightmare? Or was something inside her, something unknown, reacting in ways no one could understand. Then there are the fringe theories. One suggests she was part of an experimental drug program, and something went horribly wrong. Another posits a covert military test, chemical agents being observed in live environments. There's even the idea that Gloria's body had somehow become chemically altered, her cells mutating into something incompatible with life around her. And here's a truly unsettling thought. What if it wasn't just about what Gloria had in her system? What if Gloria herself had become toxic? Her presence, her blood, even her dying breath, capable of affecting the air. It sounds like science fiction, but in a case where 23 medical professionals fell ill in a sterile ER, that might be the least strange idea on the table. Even now, the name Gloria Ramirez carries weight in emergency medicine circles. Ask any ER doctor who trained in California, they know the story. Some call her the toxic lady. Others refer to her as the phantom patient. But one thing is certain, whatever happened in that room went far beyond cancer, solvents, or stress. Something died that night, but something else was released. Maybe it was a reaction, maybe it was a warning, or maybe it was simply a mystery, one meant to remain unsolved. The Hexham Heads Curse. It began with a pair of stone heads. In 1971, in the quiet English town of Hexham, two brothers, Colin and Leslie Robson, were digging in their backyard garden when they unearthed something strange, about the size of tennis balls. The objects appeared to be hand-carved heads made of stone, with eerily detailed faces. One had a menacing grin, the other a pained expression. Both looked ancient, worn down by time, but neither resembled anything the family had ever seen before. Fascinated, the Robsons brought the heads inside and placed them on a windowsill. That's when the trouble began. Almost immediately, bizarre things started happening in the household. Doors creaked open by themselves. Objects moved without explanation. The family felt watched. Cold spots appeared in warm rooms, and footsteps echoed through empty hallways. But the most terrifying encounter came from their neighbor, Mrs. Dodd. One night while visiting, she was violently knocked down the stairs by something unseen. Moments later, she looked up and swore she saw a creature, half man, half beast, lumbering down the hallway. It stood nearly 6 feet tall, covered in thick hair, with glowing eyes. She described it as something between a werewolf and a demon. And it wasn't just her. Over the following weeks, more neighbors began reporting a similar figure prowling the area at night. It became known as the Hexham werewolf. The Robsons, now terrified, handed the heads over to experts. The heads changed hands quickly, first to a local historian, then to Dr. Anne Ross, a Celtic scholar and folklorist. But wherever the heads went, the phenomena followed. Dr. Ross didn't believe in the supernatural, at least not until she brought the heads into her own home. She woke one night to the sound of heavy breathing. The hallway light flicked on by itself, and then she claimed she saw it, a large dark figure standing at the foot of her daughter's bed. As she approached, it turned and walked away, but made no sound, no weight against the floorboards. She said it had the unmistakable shape of a wolf walking upright. Her family too began experiencing similar sightings and disturbances. Doors slamming, objects vanishing, strange smells, and the sound of claws dragging across walls. What were these heads? Dr. Ross initially believed they might be Celtic ritual objects, possibly talismans used for spiritual ceremonies. The style of carving, crude but expressive, matched no known tradition, but carried with it the feel of deep, old magic. One theory was that the heads had been created as guardian spirits, meant to protect or ward off enemies. But something had gone wrong. Maybe they had been buried to contain their power, not preserve it. Other theories leaned darker, that the heads were cursed artifacts, created in anger or revenge, objects that absorbed the energy of their surroundings and gave it form, manifesting as poltergeists, hallucinations, or worse. One researcher tried to debunk the heads entirely. He suggested they were modern creations, made in the 1950s by a local stoneworker. But that theory didn't hold up for long. While the materials used were indeed local, chemical tests showed the weathering on the stone to be far older. And even if they were recently carved, how do you explain what followed? Whatever their origin, the pattern was clear. Where the heads went, phenomena followed. Eventually, the heads were taken in by a museum for further study. Reports about their movements became rare, and the events seemed to die down, but only for a while. Years later, in the 1980s, a private collector briefly obtained the heads. He didn't keep them for long. Within days, his family reported seeing the same figure, tall, shadowy, beast-like, standing at the edges of their vision. The collector returned the heads almost immediately, reportedly whispering, "They aren't just stone. Some believe the heads were never meant to be found, that the earth itself was trying to forget them, that they were anchors tied to something older than human memory, older than even written history, things that predate names, things that walk on the edge of dreams and nightmares. Others see the Hexham heads as a perfect example of residual energy, objects that soak in emotions, trauma, and rituals, and then replay them like a tape on loop. But even that doesn't explain the creature or the physical attacks. Then there's the deeper fear, that the heads weren't the problem, that they were merely gateways, allowing something else through, something that didn't belong here. One of the last people to study the heads claimed they emitted a strange frequency, inaudible to the human ear, but detectable with sensitive equipment. The air around them was wrong, he said. Too heavy, like something was standing behind you, just out of sight, waiting for you to turn around. The Hexham heads have since disappeared. Lost, stolen, or quietly hidden, no one knows, and maybe that's for the best, because every time they resurfaced, something followed. And in a world where stones can summon shadows, maybe some things are better left buried. The lead masks case. August 20, 1966. It was an unusually hot day in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. On a hill known as Morro do Vintém, just outside the city in the town of Niterói, a young boy flying a kite made a gruesome discovery. Among the dry bushes and scrub was something that didn't belong. 2 bodies, lying side by side, partially covered in grass. They looked like they had been carefully arranged. The police were called, and as they inspected the scene, the case immediately shifted from strange to something utterly inexplicable. The men were both dressed in formal suits, raincoats over their shoulders, and most oddly, lead masks covering their eyes, not sunglasses or welding goggles. Actual hand-cut slabs of lead, shaped to fit over the eyes like a bizarre kind of blindfold. Think homemade visors from tinfoil's heavy cousin. Nearby, police found an empty water bottle, 2 wet towels, and a small notebook. Inside the notebook was a single cryptic sentence, written in Portuguese. 1630 be at the determined place. 1830 ingest capsules. After effect protect metals. Await signal mask. That was it. No signs of trauma. No obvious wounds. No signs of poisoning. No robbery either. The men still had money in their pockets and their watches on. They had gone up that hill, in full suits, carrying homemade lead masks and towels, and died. Autopsies were inconclusive. Due to a backlog in forensics and Brazil's limited resources at the time, the bodies weren't examined for several days. By then, decomposition had erased any traces of possible toxins. No pills were found, and the capsules mentioned in the note were never identified. Their cause of death remains unknown. Who were these men? Their names were Manuel Pereira da Cruz and Miguel José Viana, 2 electronics technicians from the nearby town of Campos dos Goitacazes. Friends and business partners, both in their 30s. Those who knew them said they were intelligent, practical, and interested in science, particularly in spiritualism, fringe electronics, and experiments involving psychic communication and contact with extraterrestrials. The more investigators dug, the weirder it got. In the days leading up to their deaths, the 2 men had told their families they were heading to São Paulo to purchase work equipment. Instead, they bought raincoats, a bottle of water, and bought the lead sheets used to fashion the masks. They also purchased tools and materials associated with building crude antennas and radio devices. This wasn't just a random outing. It was planned, meticulously. There were whispers that the men were part of a group fascinated with the scientific study of spirits, including attempts to contact entities through frequency manipulation, something like seance meets shortwave radio. Some claimed the group believed that lead masks could protect their eyes from intense light emitted during spiritual or extraterrestrial contact. Others said they believed the masks shielded them from radiation or psychic energy. But the question still remained, why die? One theory suggested that the men had taken some kind of psychedelic or sedative drug, expecting to reach a higher state of consciousness or receive a message from another realm. The capsules in the note could have been part of a ritual, timed to allow them to cross into some unseen dimension. The towels, perhaps to clean off sweat, or part of a purifying act. But something went wrong. Maybe the dosage was off. Maybe the signal never came. Maybe the other side answered. Another theory was darker, that they had been duped, that someone had led them up there under the promise of enlightenment, only to poison them or abandon them. But again, no poison was ever found. Over time, the case became legend. The lead masks case. A riddle tangled in superstition, fringe science, and fear. In the 1970s, a journalist interviewed one of the surviving members of the men's spiritual study group. The man, anxious, twitchy, paranoid, said they had been very close to a breakthrough. That Manuel and Miguel believed they were about to make contact. He refused to say with whom or what. After what happened, he said, "We all stopped. Some things aren't meant to be reached." Another investigator, delving into police records years later, uncovered multiple similar incidents, other unexplained deaths in Brazil during the 60s involving odd ritual-like settings, strange messages, and crude tools for unknown experiments. Most of them were dismissed as suicides or accidents. But the similarities were disturbing. Were these men simply obsessed visionaries who got in over their heads? Or were they part of something more? An underground network experimenting with the fabric of reality, trying to tear the veil between worlds using frequency, energy, and ritual. There's one more eerie detail. On the hill where their bodies were found, some locals say lights still appear at night, silent, flickering, and pulsing with a rhythm that feels almost intentional, like a beacon or a signal. What makes the lead mask's case so unsettling isn't just the unanswered questions, it's the feeling that someone, somewhere, knew exactly what those men were doing and let them go ahead with it. And what if they weren't wrong? What if they succeeded? The masks weren't meant to protect them from the living. They were meant to protect them from what came through. The Yuba County Five. October 21st, 1978. A calm evening began to fall over the southern coast of Australia as 20-year-old pilot Frederick Valentich prepared for a routine flight. His rented Cessna 182L lifted off from Moorabbin Airport near Melbourne, headed toward King Island, a small landmass in the Bass Strait, nestled between the Australian mainland and Tasmania. It should have been an uneventful 90-minute journey, but neither Valentich nor his aircraft were ever seen again. What followed was one of the strangest aviation disappearances in modern history, because Frederick didn't vanish without a trace. He left behind a voice transmission, a final, chilling radio conversation with Melbourne Air Traffic Control, one that has baffled investigators, terrified skeptics, and ignited a decades-long storm of conspiracy theories. Valentich was flying at 4,500 feet when he radioed in at 7:06 p.m., asking if there were any aircraft in his vicinity. Frederick replied that he could see a large object above him with 4 bright lights. At first, he thought it was another aircraft, but then things got strange. "It's not an aircraft," he said. He described the object as long, metallic, and moving at high speed. It passed over him multiple times. His voice on the tape was calm at first, but quickly began to crack. He reported the craft was orbiting him, that it vanished, then reappeared. At one point, he claimed it was hovering and emitting a strange green light. Then his voice grew panicked. "It's not an aircraft. It's playing some sort of game. He's flying over me. It's not an aircraft." Moments later, Valentich said his engine was rough idling. Then finally, "It's hovering, and it's not an aircraft." What came next chilled investigators to the bone. 17 seconds of bizarre metallic scraping sounds, unlike anything air traffic control had ever heard. Then, silence. That was the last anyone ever heard from Frederick Valentich. An extensive sea and air search followed. No wreckage, no oil slicks, no evidence that a plane had gone down. Nothing. The ocean had swallowed him, or something had taken him. Initially, authorities leaned toward pilot error. Valentich was young, relatively inexperienced, and flying at dusk. Maybe he became disoriented, entered a graveyard spiral, and crashed into the sea. But this theory had holes. First, the audio transcript. Valentich didn't sound disoriented. He sounded terrified, but focused. He was clear in his communication. Secondly, there was no distress call. He didn't say, "I'm crashing." He said, "It's not an aircraft." And those metallic scraping sounds, not consistent with an engine failure, more like interference or contact. Witnesses soon emerged. Dozens of people reported seeing lights in the sky over the Bass Strait that night. A family on Cape Otway, near Valentich's flight path, claimed they saw a green light moving erratically through the sky just before 7 p.m. A farmer reported seeing a Cessna flying low, chased by a large, unidentified object. The farmer claimed he saw the aircraft vanish suddenly, as if pulled upward. But when investigators returned later to question him again, he had moved away, no forwarding address. The trail went cold. What happened to Frederick Valentich? One theory, UFO abduction. Not just because of the object he described, but because of the calm escalation of the encounter. He wasn't guessing. He knew something was following him, playing with him, interfering with his engine. It was intelligent, coordinated, and fast. Another possibility is far stranger, that Frederick didn't disappear, but was taken somewhere else. Some believers in dimensional slip or time anomalies point to the Bass Strait itself, known for other strange vanishings, odd magnetic activity, and reported light phenomena. The area has long been whispered about as Australia's answer to the Bermuda Triangle. But what if it wasn't the location? What if it was him? Frederick Valentich had an intense fascination with UFOs. He was known to read about them, talk about them, even believe in their existence. Some skeptics have used this to discredit him, suggesting he hallucinated the event or misidentified a mundane aircraft. But that theory seems backward. A man who deeply believes in something may be more vigilant, more observant, not less. And then there's the lead up to his final flight. Valentich didn't tell King Island he was coming. He didn't request landing clearance. He didn't file a complete cargo plan. He had no passengers. Some suggest he planned to disappear, faking his death in some elaborate hoax. But again, where's the evidence? The plane was never found. The ocean gave nothing back. Even decades later, not a single confirmed fragment of his Cessna has been recovered. Pilots have gone missing before, but rarely so close to land, in good weather, with a working radio and detailed final communication. And those final words, he didn't say goodbye. He didn't scream. He described in cold, frightened detail, something hovering, orbiting, playing. Then the radio hissed, cracked, and died. Years later, conspiracy forums and UFO researchers still pick apart the audio transcript. Analysts have enhanced the metallic sounds, slowed them down, searching for hidden patterns or messages. Nothing definitive, only theories. Some say it sounds like mechanical grinding. Others claim it electromagnetic interference. A few even think it resembles a synthetic voice distorted by frequency, trying to say something. But perhaps the most unsettling theory is the simplest, that whatever was with Frederick Valentich that night didn't need to speak. It just took him. The official Australian Transport Bureau report remains open-ended, cause unknown. But to those who've heard the final tape, who followed the strange lights that have danced across the Bass Strait for generations, and who still watch the skies with a mixture of awe and dread, Valentich's disappearance is more than a mystery. It's a warning. Sometimes, when we look up, something looks back. The disappearance of Frederick Valentich. October 24, 1978. It was just past 7 p.m. when 20-year-old pilot Frederick Valentich took off from Moorabbin Airport in Melbourne, Australia. His destination, King Island, a short hop across Bass Strait. He was flying a small, single-engine Cessna 182L. It was a routine flight. Weather conditions were mild, visibility decent, but Frederick would never arrive. He would never even be seen again. What makes his disappearance terrifying isn't just the vanishing act, it's what he said before he vanished. Roughly 45 minutes into the flight, Valentich radioed Melbourne Air Traffic Control to report something strange. He described seeing an aircraft several thousand feet above him, but it wasn't acting like a typical plane. It was moving erratically, at high speed, circling him. Then he said it vanished. Moments later, he radioed again. It had returned, hovering, then zooming past him at speeds no known aircraft could achieve. At 7:09 p.m., he sent this message. "It's not an aircraft, it is hovering, and it's not an aircraft." The controller, puzzled, asked him to identify the object. Valentich paused, his voice tight. "It has a green light and sort of metallic, it's shiny on the outside." Then, abruptly, came his final transmission. "It's hovering, and it's not an aircraft." A loud metallic scraping sound filled the radio for 17 seconds. Then silence. The line went dead. No mayday, no crash report, just silence. The search began immediately. Australian authorities launched a massive air and sea operation. For 7 days, they combed hundreds of miles of ocean and coastline. Not a single trace of Frederick, his plane, or any debris was found. The ocean had swallowed him whole. Initially, skeptics dismissed the case as pilot error. Valentich was young and inexperienced, with only about 150 flight hours under his belt. Some speculated that he may have become disoriented, tricked by reflections or optical illusions in the twilight sky. Others proposed that he may have been flying upside down, mistaking his own aircraft's lights for something else. But there were problems with that theory. An upside-down Cessna would stall quickly, and Valentich had no reason to descend over the water. He was following protocol and speaking calmly. He knew what he saw. Then came the sightings. That night, October 21, multiple people across southern Victoria reported seeing strange green lights in the sky over the Bass Strait. Witnesses described a cigar-shaped craft hovering silently, with green illumination and odd jerking movements. Some claimed they saw a small plane being followed by a larger object. None of these reports made the news until after Valentich's story broke, ruling out mass hysteria or suggestion. Even more chilling, a photographer in the area had taken a long exposure photo that evening. When developed, it showed a streaking object in the sky. No wings, no blinking lights, just a solid bar of glowing green. And still, no wreckage was ever found. Valentich's disappearance remains an open case. In the official investigation, the Australian Department of Transport concluded, the reason for the disappearance of the aircraft has not been determined. That's it, no answers, no theories endorsed, just a young pilot who vanished into the sky. But what did Frederick see? Some believe it was a top-secret military aircraft, perhaps testing experimental tech in restricted airspace. But no such operations were admitted, and the speeds and behavior he described would have been decades ahead of 1978. Others think it was a UFO, not necessarily alien in origin, but something unknown operating outside the boundaries of human flight. That idea is fueled by Frederick himself. He had a known interest in UFOs, had checked out books on them, and spoken to friends about what he'd do if he ever saw one. But knowing about UFOs doesn't explain disappearing into thin air. There's a darker theory, that whatever he encountered, it wasn't passive, that the encounter ended with interference, some form of aggressive contact, maybe an accident, maybe intentional. Valentich wasn't panicking, he was observing, right up until something silenced him. And what about that final transmission, the metallic scraping? For 17 full seconds. Analysts say it wasn't feedback or engine noise, it had a rhythm, almost like mechanical movement or distortion from a powerful electromagnetic field. It's never been fully explained. In 2014, 36 years later, part of a Cessna cowling was found washed ashore on Flinders Island, northeast of the Bass Strait. It was corroded and aged, but consistent with Valentich's model of aircraft. The Australian authorities said it could be part of his plane, but no serial number was found. No confirmation ever came, and that was it. Just one piece. Still no fuselage, no engine, no pilot, just questions. Why did Valentich lie about the purpose of his flight? He told family he was picking up passengers on King Island, but no such passengers existed. Was he lured there? Was he meeting someone, or something? What did he see that made him break protocol and describe it mid-flight? Pilots are trained not to report UFOs casually, but he was calm, detailed, focused, and then silence. Frederick Valentich's disappearance still haunts Australian aviation. His case is taught in flight schools, not because of what we know, but because of what we don't. He didn't crash in a storm. He didn't call for help. He was flying steadily, clearly, communicating, until he wasn't. Maybe he got too close to something. Maybe he opened a door that wasn't supposed to open. Maybe the sky took him. Whatever the truth is, it's still up there, somewhere above the waves of Bass Strait, in the silence where radar can't reach, and answers don't echo back.